Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications. The following program is a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts Network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com to learn more about this and our other weekly storytelling programs. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the show.
Good evening. I'm storyteller Otis Jiry, and I ain't your grandfather. From where I'm from, we don't do bedtime stories. And if that's what you were expecting, you're in the wrong place. If it's terrifying tales you're after, well then, I've got just the thing. Get comfortable, settle in, turn off the lights, if you dare. Your night is about to get a whole lot darker. Who needs sleep anyway?
Good evening, friends, and welcome back to Scary Stories Told in the Dark. I'm your host, Otis Jiry, and tonight we invite you to sit quietly, to listen, because some things don't knock, they whisper. Tonight's tales are all about that which moves in the margins, the glances that linger, the shapes that wait just outside the doorway. And if you're wondering what happens when you finally lean in to hear what they're saying, well, you're about to find out. And joining me once again, a man who doesn't just listen to the walls, he answers back. My ever-intrepid co-host, Malcolm Blackwood.
Glad to be back, Otis. Tonight's episode will test your sense of space, because whether it's a hallway, a hidden tunnel, or a hallway no one else seems to see, these stories all ask the same question. If the walls remember everything, what are they saying when you're not listening?
So close the door behind you, friend. Tight, because you never know what's waiting on the other side. Before we start prying into floorboards and pulling on threads that shouldn't be pulled, a quick message for those of you who like your horror uncut and uninterrupted.
Join our patrons area for just $7.99 a month, or save big with our annual plan. You'll get ad-free episodes, early access to upcoming stories, and a treasure trove of exclusive content we keep in the vault for the truly brave.
Just head to simplyscarypodcast.com and click Patrons. That'll take you over to chillingtalesfordarknights.com, where there's always one more tale just waiting to be told.
Support indie horror, fuel the fear, and keep the whispers coming.
Now then, let's get started, shall we? We begin in a familiar place, one of fluorescent lights, convention booths, and friendly vendors. But what happens when someone takes the shortcut everyone avoids and finds themselves walking through a hallway that remembers everyone who came before? This is Hallway of Shadows by Micah Edwards, performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. There's one thing I've learned in my years of vending at conventions. It's that you follow the crowd. Folks who've been there before have already made all the mistakes for you. As long as you're smart enough to learn from those who came before, you don't have to make those mistakes over again. If you see the other vendors bringing in fans, You better go get a little desk fan for your table, or you're going to be suffering in inadequate AC. If everyone's avoiding a specific food truck, it doesn't matter how popular it is with the attendees, you stay away if you're smart. More than anything else, it's important to just go with everything else during setup and teardown. You might think you've spotted a shortcut, but the tables who've been vending this convention for years almost certainly know something you don't know. Maybe that convention elevator moves at a snail's pace. Maybe those nearby stairs are dangerously low friction. Maybe that door to the parking lot has an alarm that goes off if you prop it open for too long. Whatever the reason, if no one's using an easier path, it's because that path isn't actually easier. You can believe those who already know, or you can become one more who had to learn the hard way. There are always a few who have to see for themselves. At this convention, that was Partha. He had comic books for sale, long boxes densely packed with carefully sleeved issues. He was setting up at the table next to mine and laughed when he saw me wheeling all my bins from the doors at the front of the convention hall. Man, you went the long way round, huh? It's where everyone was going, I said, waving at the stream of vendors behind me. Seemed the best way not to get lost or stuck somewhere. Nope. See that door 20 feet behind us? Opens to a hallway that goes straight to the parking lot. Can't be 100 feet from here to the door of my car. How far do you have to walk? A quarter mile? I looked back across the convention hall. It was at least 200 feet just from the doors, and before that, I had to wind through a couple of corridors and cross the lobby, and that was all after the parking lot. Probably not a quarter mile, but maybe a tenth. Certainly much more than the 100 feet Partha was boasting about. Must be a good reason no one else is going through there, I said. Maintenance hallway, maybe? Could be we're supposed to keep it clear. Well, they haven't marked it, if so, he said. Nothing on or in it but that stupid sign. Piece of paper had been taped to the door with the handwritten words, Hallway of Shadows. It was stuck down with wide strips of transparent packing tape, fully covering the paper and fastening it securely to the metal of the door. Whoever had put it there had wanted to make sure it didn't come free. Sounds like a sideshow exhibit, I said. Partha shrugged. Nothing in there but an empty back corridor. Nothing stored, nothing staged. It just looks like a rusty emergency door from the parking lot side. I figured it'd be locked, so I was stoked when it opened and turned out to be the most convenient way in. I guess no one else thought to try the door. I guess, I said. It didn't seem much more convenient, but I knew that later I'd find Partha locked out or locked in or looking for the number of the lot that had towed his car or something. If there was an easier way that wasn't being used, then it wasn't actually easier. I knew that was true, even if I didn't know why in this case. All day long, that door stayed shut. I saw a few folks walk toward it, only to be shooed away by the vendors nearby. I couldn't make out their conversation, so eventually, when I had a slow moment, I walked over to ask for myself. What's with the hallway of shadows? We allowed to use that, or what? Nah, it's got an alarm on it, said the man at the booth. His name tag identified him as Norman. His tired attitude confirmed what I'd seen. He'd been telling people this all day. I gestured back toward my booth. Partha says it was fine this morning. The change in Norman's attitude was abrupt and intense. You went through it? What time? Load in, so like 7, I guessed. Way too late, he muttered. Might have been cloudy enough still. Maybe. He looked down the road to where Partha sat, happily arguing with an attendee about the condition of one of the comics. He shook his head. Guess we'll see, he said, again mostly under his breath. See what? My question startled him, as if he was surprised I was still there. Nothing. We'll see if there was a silent alarm. If the fire marshal comes. If he doesn't, Then I suppose he got away with it. Yeah, I suppose so, I said. Wasn't sure what was going on here, but it was pretty clear that I wasn't going to get any further answers. I started to walk away. Hey, Norman called after me. Don't go through that hallway, though, in case they turned the alarm back on. I gave him a thumbs up. I could see someone approaching my table and looking around for the vendor. I hurried back to catch them before they wandered past. The more games I sold this weekend, the less I had to pack back up at the end. Money was nice in the abstract, but getting to do less manual labor was always my more immediate motivating factor during these conventions. The strangest thing was that at the end of the day, once they locked the vendor hall and we were all going home through the night, I saw plenty of people going out through the hallway of shadows. It was a strange pattern, though. They only ever entered the door one at a time. Each person closed it behind them, even if they were with the other people. The next person would open it immediately, so it wasn't like they were waiting for the first one to make it down the hall. It was an inversion of the standard societal custom of holding the door for the person before you. When entering the hallway of shadows, everyone made sure to shut the door firmly in the face of whoever might be left behind. Except Partha, of course. He gestured me toward the door as we were leaving. Look, let me show you how much shorter this way is. He opened the door and held it for me. Shoot, it's pitch black in there. Is there a light switch? There isn't, called a slightly panicked voice from inside. Look, if you're coming through, then come on. It's just a straight shot to the far side. It's like 20 feet. You don't need lights. The left wall's clear if you need to keep your hand on something. Come on, don't hang around in the doorway. The whole speech was delivered in a rush. We couldn't see the speaker. Partha and I shrugged and stepped inside. The door swung shut behind us. The hallway wasn't quite as dark as it had seemed. The left wall was lined with windows near the ceiling, and although they let in only a little dim light from the night sky, it was enough to see by. There was a figure at the far end. Come on, this way, she said. I walked toward the speaker, trailing my hand along the wall as he'd suggested. As we drew close, he opened the far door. It led directly to the lot where I'd parked this morning, just as Partha had said. We all stepped out onto the sidewalk, and the woman closed the door behind us. So what's with everyone else? Said Partha. What do you mean? She said. In the hallway. They're just chilling out there. The woman had an expression on her face that at the time I read as confusion. There wasn't anyone else in there. Partha gave a half laugh, as if he thought she was telling a joke. Yes, there was. It had to be like half the vendor hall lined up in there against the far wall. I mean, it was hard to see in there, but there were definitely a bunch of people. He looked at me for confirmation, but I could only shrug. I didn't notice anyone. Maybe you got better night vision than I do. They were definitely there. He reopened the door to the same impenetrable darkness. Hello? He flipped on his phone flashlight and shone it into the hallway. It was narrow and empty. There was nothing to hide behind. There was no one there. Well, I swear, started Partha. He stopped and suddenly turned around as if he thought they had gotten behind him somehow. There was no one there but the vendor we had met in the hallway of shadows, who flinched away from his light as if it were dangerous. Close the door, she said, and don't ever bring a light in there. She hurried off before we could ask any questions. Partha and I stared at each other for a moment. Definitely some sort of a prank, he said. His car was closer than mine, but he was still sitting in it when I left the parking lot. He was staring at the door as if he still expected all those people he had seen to come pouring out. I saw him startled when my headlights panned over him. He gave me a sheepish wave as I drove away. The next morning, I parked in the same lot. I eyeballed the door, which was not marked at all from this side. I thought about taking the shortcut inside. I told myself it was probably locked, that the alarm was probably turned back on, and I walked around the long way. Partha was at his table by the time I arrived. "Getting your morning hike in, I see. Could have just come through the hallway like I did." "No one waiting in there for you this morning?" I joked. He laughed, but it sounded a little strained. "I'll be honest, that weirded me out. I dreamt about it last night. I was here in the convention center, but no matter which door I opened to get out, it led to that hallway. It was always pitch black, but never empty. I could always tell the darkness was full, although I didn't know what. And every door led to that hallway. Not just a similar one, the same one, like it was there ahead of me." The laughter vanished from his voice as he described the dream, replaced by desperation and fear. I must have been staring because when he met my eyes, he forced a smile back onto his face. "Anyway, how'd sales go for you yesterday? Shelves are still looking pretty full, but we should be getting the main crowds today, yeah?" "Hey, if you need to talk about," I began. Partha cut me off. "No, I'm sorry I brought it up. I just met you yesterday. I didn't mean to turn you into my convention therapist. Come on, let's talk shop. Did you make back your table fee yet?" I let him steer the conversation away to safer territory, but I wondered what exactly he thought he'd seen in that hallway. It was clear it had rattled him, if it was still weighing on his mind, under the harsh white glare of the convention hall lighting. I'd been spooked by shadows plenty of times, but it always seemed silly the following day. He didn't seem to be experiencing the same relief. As the day went on, Partha got jumpier and jumpier. I regularly caught him suddenly snapping his head to one side or the other, as if he'd spotted a sudden movement in his peripheral vision. He spent a lot of time looking under the drapery covering his table and around the corner of the fabric divider behind him. And over again, I found him staring at the closed door of the hallway of shadows. "Something over there?" I asked him at one point. He gave me the same sheepish grin I'd seen the previous night. "Nah, I just thought I saw something is all." Around noon, he pulled the drape over his comics and asked me to keep an eye on his table for a couple of minutes while he ducked out to get a sandwich. I agreed, but didn't really pay too much attention to it. I had my own flow of customers to attend to. Anyone who wanted to steal anything would have had to move the drape aside first, and I figured I was bound to notice something that large. A few minutes later, I almost jumped out of my skin when Partha hissed at me from the corner of my booth. He was crouched down, hidden behind a wire rack filled with games. I could only see his wide eyes and the top of his head. "Who's in my chair?" he whispered. I turned to look. The seat was empty. "No one. No one's touched your stuff the whole time you were gone," I said. His eyes darted past mine, staring through the wire rack at his seat. "Is no one there?" I looked again, as if somehow I might have missed a person occupying the chair. There was no one. I shook my head. Partha slowly rose from behind the rack, his gaze fixed on the chair the entire time. His eyes widened even further as he cleared the low rack and gained an obstructed view of the empty chair. "Someone was there," he said. "I saw them through the rack, and then they were just gone." "Where would they have gone?" I asked. "Away," he said. His eyes flicked wildly from side to side. "I hope." He started to crouch down as if to peer through the rack again, then vacillated, wobbling back and forth on his toes. "Hey, I said, can you go back to your table? I need to keep the space open for the folks who are buying stuff." Yeah, said Partha. Sorry. He skulked past, peering under his chair before flipping down into it. He drummed his fingers on the table before him. He looked underneath it. He did not uncover the comics. He seemed reluctant to touch the drape. I turned my back slightly to him and tried to focus on my customers instead of his unsettling movements. The next time I looked over, he was gone. I hadn't heard him leave. His chair hadn't been pushed back from the table. I glanced underneath, but there was nothing there but a few cardboard boxes tucked out of the way. The sandwich he had gone to get still sat there with only 2 bites out of it. I told myself that he must have gone to get a drink or to the bathroom or something else normal. But the minutes slipped by, turning slowly into hours, and Partha never returned. His table of comics remained shrouded all through the Saturday rush. A few people asked if I knew when he'd be back. I could only shrug. Eventually, the flow of shoppers slowed to a trickle, and then even those last few were herded out as they closed the vendor hall for the night. I closed up my booth, looking over at Partha's abandoned table as I did so. The sandwich was still there. Partha had never returned. I should have taken the long way around on the way out. I should never have gone back through the hallway. But I told myself I was being absurd. That was me jumping at shadows, like Partha had been. I armed myself with my rationality and took the shortcut back to my car. As the door to the hallway of shadows shut behind me, I heard a quiet noise, barely louder than the whisper of air from my closing door. I thought it might have been my name. "Partha?" I asked, and I did something unfathomably stupid. I took out my phone. I turned on the flashlight. For a moment, an instant, the light merely illuminated the dark. The room was still pitch black, but now I was looking at it. Then the darkness scattered like cockroaches, not disappearing as it should have in light, but scuttling away in 10,000 shivering pieces. It fled, but only as far as my light reached. I could feel it gathered at the edges. The hallway was empty, nothing but plain white walls and a cement floor. My own shadow stretched out across it, reaching for the exit to the parking lot. I walked forward, watching that shadow climb the wall and flow over the door, and only then did it occur to me. I was holding the light in front of myself. So what then was casting the shadow? I bolted. I leapt across those last few feet to the door, cringing as the shadow silently roared up in front of me. But when my shoulder slammed into the metal door, it flew open, dumping me onto the sidewalk by the parking lot. The shadows outside were only shadows. The hallway behind me was just a hallway. I slammed the door shut and repeated this to myself. There was nothing wrong. It was all a trick of the light. I kept the interior lights on in my car as I drove to my hotel, but still I felt there was something in the back seat. I turned on every light in the room when I arrived, but the corners, closets, and spaces I could not see taunted me. And when I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of the hallway of shadows. It was not everywhere, as it had been in Partha's dream, not at first. Only some of the doors I opened led to a hallway. I still had places I could go, places I could run, but the more doors I went through, the more of them opened into that hallway, until at last I found myself in the convention hall, surrounded by dozens of doors on every side, and behind every single one was the hallway. I stood there in the center of the room, paralyzed by fear, and then every door began to slowly swing open at once. The darkness poured forth, thick and viscous as syrup, and dragged me away into eternal night. I woke up screaming. The lights were all still on. I was alive, untouched, for now. I thought about getting in my car and driving away. I thought about leaving my booth next to Partha's shrouded collection and letting them tell whatever stories they might. If I thought I could escape the hallway, I would have tried. But already I see the movement in the shadows around me, the things darting closer every time I look away. Already I can feel them closing in. One way or another, I will end up in the dark, in the hallway, forever. And that was Hallway of Shadows by Micah Edwards, performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry.
You know, Otis, if someone tapes a sign to a door that says, "Do not enter," maybe, just maybe, you should listen.
Especially if the sign's been there long enough for the hallway to earn a name.
Coming up next, a walk through childhood memories brings us back to the reeds behind an old school where something or someone is still waiting. A nighttime call, a worried friend, a girl meeting a stranger by the creek behind her old elementary school. But some places don't just echo memories, they keep them. And in the reeds, the past whispers louder than ever. This is The Reeds by Chisto Healy, performed by yours truly, Malcolm Blackwood. I'll never forget that day. For so many years I've thought about it, about her, and wished for answers. I doubt I'll ever get any. I know I won't. From time to time, I go back to New York to visit my dad or friends, and I consider going back there, but I never have the courage to actually do it. I'll just ride past it in the car and stare out the window like I've seen a ghost. Because I have. Let me take you back with me this time and start from the beginning. October 1993, Baldwin, Long Island, New York. I was far from popular and only just starting to find my own and build my circle of friends in my junior year of high school. I was a shy kid with anxiety, but I was also built with strong values and integrity. I wanted to take care of people and help wherever I could, which is important because it plays a big part in how this all came to be. My friend, we'll call her Valerie, had some self-esteem issues like the rest of us misfit toys. But she was a good person and didn't have a mean bone in her body. It was hard for her to stand up for herself, and she was physically small too, which only made everyone that much more frightening. She had been trying to date outside of school, to find someone not connected to the people we knew, someone she could be herself with. And back then the internet wasn't really a thing. People didn't even have cell phones unless they were a doctor or a drug dealer. We had pagers, and we got messages alerting us that people wanted to talk, and then we ran to the nearest payphone to call them and see what they urgently wanted. This is also important to the story. I had another friend back then, a girl named Debbie. I'm still friends with her today. It was fall and cold, the ghostly breeze whipping the golden leaves from the trees that lined the roads. It was my favorite time of year, and I loved sitting outside and listening to the wind, as if it were the voices of spirits calling to me. It wasn't a ghost that called me that night, though. It was Debbie. I didn't hear the phone because I was outside, contemplative, enjoying the season, and writing lyrics of what would be my next rock song. The screen door opened with a creak, and my mother's head poked outside. "What are you doing out here? You're not even wearing a jacket. You're gonna get sick. Come inside, huh?" "I'm fine, Ma," I said back. "Well, you gotta come in anyway. Debbie is on the phone." Oh. Well, that was a different matter. If a friend was calling me at night, they probably needed me, and I never wanted to let anyone down. When Debbie had trouble with a bully, I took him on. I had been the quiet kid before that, and I was even recognized in the yearbook for it, but there was no avoiding everyone after that. I had gotten suspended for inciting a riot, and people changed the words on my Ned's Atomic Dustbin shirt to say, "Kill your bullies," instead of "kill your television." It wasn't very creative, and no bullies died, thankfully, but one did catch a walloping. Debbie and I had been friends already, but we would be lifelong friends after that. I got up and hurried into the house. My mom pointed to the phone on the table, a mustard yellow, coiled cord draping from the wall into my seat nearby. She went to resume her seat on the couch in front of the TV. My mother had her scheduled programming mapped out in a planner with what shows came on, what nights, at what times, and which ones were more important to watch, and when she couldn't decide, she had a VCR that my brother had to program for her to record her shows because she couldn't figure it out. To be fair, I didn't know the first thing about it, outside of play, record, stop, and rewind. She took up her vigil in front of the TV, White Russian in hand, and I went into the kitchen to answer the phone. "Hey," I said, sitting at the table. "It's Valerie," Debbie said, sounding panicked. Immediately, I abandoned my seat and walked around the corner toward the back door, stretching that phone cord until there wasn't a single coil left in it. "What do you mean? What's wrong?" I asked, her worry contagious. "Valerie met this guy. He's a college guy, and creepy, and he wanted to date her, and she was so happy to have the attention that she said yes." "All right," I said. "Don't panic yet. Maybe he's a good guy." I swear I could hear her shake her head. "He's not. He gives me the creeps. And Chisto, he isn't coming to pick her up. He asked her to meet him at the elementary school on Morn Ave." "Okay, that's a little weird," I admitted. "Why would a college guy with a car want the high school girl to meet him at a dark school after hours?" "Exactly," she exclaimed, her fear palpable. "It's not safe out there without a creepy college guy. Never mind with him. We have to do something." I nodded my agreement and then realized she couldn't see it. Life is so much easier now with video chatting. Yeah, I agree," I said. "Can you get out? I'll get my bat and head over there. It's pretty close to my house and I can get there fast. If she's in danger, I'll keep her safe, I promise." "Yeah, I'll meet you there. See you in a few," she said, immediately hanging up. I walked to the base on the wall and hung my phone up as well. I went around the corner into my room and seized my Louisville Slugger. Then I checked on my mom, who was focused on the TV. "I'm running out to help Debbie with something, Ma. I'll be back in a few minutes. Promise." "Take your jacket so you don't end up with pneumonia," she said, without turning to look at me. Someone on TV was telling a criminal to stop or they would shoot. I grabbed my jacket off the back of a chair at the dining room table and raced out the door. The school wasn't far from my house, but I was still nervous because Valerie's house was even closer to it, and I didn't know when she left to meet this guy or what he or his car looked like. It didn't take a grown man long to hurt a girl. I walked as fast as I could, and the wind swirled around me like it was physically following me. Leaves swirled around me like I was a mini cyclone ripping them from the ground as I hurried by. It didn't take me long to get to the school. I'd only seen it during the day, and I never went there, as I only moved to Baldwin for high school, so I had no fond childhood memories connecting me to the place. Seeing it now, in the pitch-black night, it looked seriously ominous. The windows were covered in construction paper, which only served to make it darker. I swallowed a lump in my throat and slowed my pace, walking slowly toward the front of the school. There was a creek behind it, covered in tall reeds, so it was obscured from view, but the water brought an even stronger breeze. The reeds swayed back and forth like jaundiced skeletons waving at me mockingly. "Hey," Debbie called, making me jump out of my skin. With a hand on my heart, I turned to look at her. She grinned and said, "Sorry, I thought you saw me." "I can't see anything," I said. "I can't believe how dark it is." "Right? It's creepy out here, but that was exactly my point. Why in the hell would this guy, Carrie, want to meet Valerie here, of all places?" I paid a glance toward the creepy school and nodded. "Yeah, no, you're right. It's definitely shady. Have you seen her at all? Or spoken to her?" "I tried to call, but I only got her mother, who said she'd already left, and I didn't want to freak her out, so I didn't tell her why I was worried. I figured we had it under control. Apparently, she told her mom she was going out to meet me, which is true, but Valerie didn't know that. I could choke her using me for her lies when she's going out to meet some creeper by the murder creek in the middle of the damn night." "Yeah," was all I said. I crossed the street, and Debbie followed until we both stood in the grass on Morn School grounds. There was a stone bench, and I pointed at it. "Let's split up and look for Val. We'll meet back at this bench in a few minutes." "Sounds good." The last thing I wanted to do was walk all around that creepy-ass school by myself or send Debbie to do the same. But if Valerie really was in trouble, we needed more chances to find her and rescue her. I felt better when I realized that Debbie had brought a bat of her own. Great minds think alike. If this guy really was up to no good like she suspected, then we were going to have a home run derby and make sure he regretted his choices. We walked opposite ways around the giant building towards those waving reeds. The way the wind whistled through them, they sounded like they were whispering and laughing, and it made me shiver. They had to be taller than my dad, maybe 7 or 8 feet tall. A crow squawked from somewhere, and I couldn't see the black bird in the dark of night, so it made me jump. I could hear Debbie calling for Valerie, her voice getting quieter as she got further away from me, though Debbie was someone who could definitely project. She was always loud and boisterous, and I grew to love it. I didn't call for Valerie as I went the other way. If this guy was on top of her or something, I didn't want him to know I was coming until it was too late and he was within swinging range. If he was hurting her, I was not going to let him out of there so easily. I didn't see anyone, and I was afraid of passing him in the dark. Nowadays, I would just turn on the flashlight on my cell phone, but I didn't have that option back then. I just had to squint through the dark and hope my eyes would adjust. I walked slowly and quietly and bent down to see close to the ground. I looked behind the trash cans and bushes, behind the trees, and behind the bike rack. I didn't see Valerie, or anyone for that matter. All I saw were leaves dancing on the wind while the reeds laughed at me for being frightened. I flipped up my middle finger at them. I really hope you're not in there, I thought. Please don't be in there. My gut told me to check, but I didn't want to. I'd heard talk of alligators being in there and the creek leading to the sewers. I'd watched way too many horror movies to go pushing my way through there, where no one would see me get dragged off and eaten or butchered. Hell no. Nope. Sorry. Not me. Not tonight. If we couldn't find Valerie anywhere else, then Debbie and I could go inspect the reeds together, loudly, and in that case, I would be glad to scare off anything or anyone in hiding. Shoo! Get out of here! You can't eat us! We're just kids! The crow flew past me in a wild flurry of wings, and I hadn't seen it coming, so I yelped, immediately covering my mouth in embarrassment. It landed on the school roof and looked at me. I glared back at the creature and said quietly but forcefully, "Not cool, bro. Not cool." My hands gripped the handle of the baseball bat more tightly. The shadows started playing tricks on me. I kept thinking I saw Valerie or someone lying in the grass or leaning against the brick siding of the building. When I got closer, bat raised high and ready to strike, I always found nothing. The reeds continued to whistle and whisper, and I wanted nothing more than to just find Valerie and go home. I wanted to get away from that place, not just for this moment, but forever. I decided right then and there that I hated that school, and I was glad I never attended it. Why would they have that creek and those big, tall, scary reeds behind an elementary school anyway? It didn't make a lick of sense to me. There's no way it wasn't a safety hazard. If a little kid wandered away from their class and went in there, no one would see them. Even if they didn't get snatched, like my mind immediately went to, they could have just as easily fallen into the creek and gotten swept away in the current, slapping them against filthy, mossy rocks and dragging them down into the sewers or wherever that thing led to. It was definitely a terrible design, I decided. If I still lived there when I grew up, I declared to myself that I would never send my kids there. I don't live there anymore. I moved away long before I had any kids, so that prophecy came true, I suppose. I felt my skin crawling, as if ants were running all over it. If Valerie had left before we did to go there, we should have at least seen her walking up like we saw each other. She should have been there somewhere. Then I got a terrible thought. What if he did meet her there with his car? What if he saw us or someone else and decided to drive away with her and take her to a different but equally terrifying part of town? I had to find Debbie. We had to page Valerie and see if she called back. If we could get a hold of her, that was a good sign. Surely, if she had been abducted by some evil guy, he wouldn't let her go to a payphone and call her friends back. Or even if she managed to sneak away to call us, and he found her and got angry, she could tell us where she was, and we could run there. All the worst thoughts ran through my mind of places he could have taken her and parked the car for absolute privacy, and the terrible things he could be doing to her on this dark autumn night. I said a quiet prayer to God as I looped around and approached the bench from the other side. Debbie was already there, sitting on it and twirling her baseball bat before her while she waited for me. "Nothing?" I asked as I walked up, hugging myself more against the fear than the cold. She shook her big poof of hair. "Nope, not a thing. Maybe she changed her mind and decided not to come. Or maybe he chose this place because no one would see, and when she did come, he stuffed her in the car and took her to a different creepy spot where he could have his way with her, or kill her, or God knows what else," I said in a panic. "Shoot, you're right," Debbie said with a frown. "They could be anywhere." "Do you know her number by heart?" I asked. "Of course," she said with a psh sound. "That's my homegirl. She's been a part of my posse since grade school. Can you find a payphone and call her? We need to know, and we can't know for sure without trying to get a hold of her." "Word. I'll go page her and see if she calls me back. Stay here in case she shows up or we missed her and she's here somewhere and cries for help." I nodded. "You got it. Try to be quick though, okay? This place gives me the creeps." She nodded and turned without a word to run up Morn Avenue. A moment later, I was staring at the dark school and something tapped me on the shoulder. I jumped and heard laughter. When I looked, Debbie was beside me. "Sorry, dude. I need a quarter." Cursing under my breath, I dug in my pocket until I fished out several quarters. I always kept some on me, just in case. My mother had anxiety, so I was always raised to plan ahead and be ready for anything. I slapped the quarters into Debbie's hand, and she ran off again. This time, I watched her until I couldn't see her anymore. I didn't want her or anyone else sneaking up on me. I wriggled like a snake shedding its skin, uncomfortable and scared. When I knew she was gone and would be for a few minutes, as she tried to get a hold of Valerie, I turned back toward the school. The fact that I was alone out there hit me like a slap in the face. Bravado only goes so far. I clutched tightly to the baseball bat and stared past the school at the reeds. They seemed to stare back. I tried to will Debbie to hurry. The reeds waved in the breeze and whispered their strange words, calling me over to them. We never did check, I thought with a frown. I should at least look, right? What if she's hurt in there somewhere and needs help? Reluctantly, I started toward the creek at the back of the school. The wind increased, howling like a wolf at the moon. Leaves lifted from everywhere and slapped against me. Now that I think back on it, I wonder if they were trying to stop me, to warn me away. If they were, I didn't listen. "Come," said the reeds. "Come to us. Come see what we have to show you. Come look. Come." My instincts told me to cut and run. Debbie would find Val and everything would be okay. Just get the hell out of there. But my body didn't listen. I kept approaching those reeds with slow, deliberate steps. "Caw! Caw!" shouted the crow. "Come," whispered the reeds. "Look." The breeze whistled and moaned like a woman in agony. I walked forward until I couldn't anymore. My legs stopped moving. I tried to force them, but they wouldn't budge. It was like 2 strong hands had broken the earth and reached up from underneath to seize my ankles and hold me in place. "What's happening?" I whispered. I was staring at the blowing reeds when they grew impossibly still. The whispers fell into silence, thick, tangible silence. Before my eyes, the reeds parted like the curtains at a stage show, moving to open the scene. I no longer wanted to see what was behind them, and I tried to turn my head, to look away, and I couldn't move my head any more than I could my legs. Phantom hands grasped my jaw and held it, forcing my face forward. I couldn't fight against it no matter how hard I tried, and God, did I try. Tears rolled from the corners of my eyes. There was a man standing before me, unmasked by the reeds that moved aside. He was menacing, to say the least, and held a limp girl in his arms, draped over backward like they were in a dance competition. I had never been so afraid in my life, for one particular reason. I have a fantasia. I didn't know what it was called back then, or that it even had a name, but it means I can't visualize things. I can't imagine things in pictures. I can't daydream in images. My dreams at night are as black as this fateful autumn evening. I couldn't even close my eyes and picture the face of my own mother or someone I saw every day. So, seeing these people behind the reeds right at that moment meant either they were real and it was currently happening, or I didn't want to think about the or. He had a weathered gray Stetson casting a shadow over his eyes, a button-down shirt, and a bolo tie. His sleeves were rolled up, and a thick, wide scar cut through the Celtic cross tattoo on his tanned forearm. His fist held the thin fabric of the young woman's baby doll dress, fluffy and pink. His other hand held a bottle of Jack Daniel's whiskey that he sipped from. It was almost empty, and just a small bit sloshed at the bottom when he took it away from his mouth. There were dark stains on the glass. Was it blood? The girl's face was already bruised and swollen. Her hands clawed at his chest weakly like her heart wanted to fight, but her body didn't have the strength left to comply. I knew I should help her. I needed to help her. But I couldn't. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was watch, and my heart broke in my chest. Then the man's head turned. It was unnatural, like he was a marionette whose string had been tugged. I would have gasped if I could have. Her head turned too, her piercing blue eyes stabbing me like knives. Her mouth fell open, and she croaked out a plea for help, but it was unintelligible. It was the bizarre whispering of the reeds. Then the man lifted the thick glass bottle and started to bash the girl in the face. I was desperate to move, to at the very least look away and not watch this horrible brutality, but I wasn't given a choice. When at last he dropped her in a crumpled, broken heap, her pink dress stained red, the reeds closed once more, and the horror movie ended. The wind resumed, and a leaf slapped me in my tear-wet cheek. I peeled it away and threw it to the ground, my heart racing. I waited for something else, but there was nothing. I noticed the bat I was carrying was on the ground in front of me, lying in the grass. I shivered and realized I wasn't wearing my coat anymore. "Hey," Debbie said, and I screamed. "Whoa, you okay? Why are you wearing your coat? It's freezing." I don't know," I said honestly, bending to pick it up. "Sorry it took so long, but the only payphone was at Buttafuoco's shop, and I had to page her and wait for her to call back. But the good news is, she's okay. She made it halfway here and got scared, so she turned back. She's home. I guess he realized she wasn't coming because he must have left too." "Yeah, that's good," I said, shrugging my coat on. My eyes kept moving to the reeds, though. I couldn't help it. I walked over to them now that my legs were willing to let me, and Debbie walked with me. "Yeah," she said as we reached them. "That's why I was so scared. A girl was killed behind these reeds last year. She met a guy at a bar with a fake ID, and he ended up beating her to death with a liquor bottle. Scary stuff, man. I heard he was never caught." My head whipped around hard enough to give me whiplash. I stared at her. "Are you serious right now?" "Yeah. That's why I was freaking out. I thought you knew. Everyone knew." "I didn't know. I didn't know. What's going on with you? You look like you've seen a ghost." I looked away from her and pulled the reeds open like the curtains they showed me they were. Behind them was grass littered with bottles, cans, empty chip bags, and condom wrappers. Beyond that was the creek, flowing by peacefully. I looked back at Debbie as I let the reeds fall closed, and I said, "I think maybe I did." That was The Reeds by Chisto Healy, performed by yours truly, Malcolm Blackwood.
I don't know what's worse, creepy reeds, whispering winds, or realizing you've been called somewhere you were never meant to leave.
Either way, Otis, it's always the ones who care the most that end up walking in first.
And speaking of that, our next tale features a knock at the door during a midnight storm. But when something arrives with the tide, you best think twice before bringing it in. When a lighthouse keeper answers a knock in the middle of a storm, he finds more than just seawater waiting on his threshold. What follows is a descent into guilt, memory, and something pulled from depths no light was meant to touch. This is Children of the Storm by Vivian Granger, performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. Part 1. The storm had come down from the north without warning, a black wall of cloud that swallowed the stars and smothered the sea in darkness. Wind clawed at the cliffs with wild, shrieking hands, and the lighthouse stood against it all, a stoic, crumbling finger of stone lashed by rain and spray. Inside, Donovan Kimball slept fitfully beneath a heavy quilt, one arm flung over his eyes to block the occasional flicker of lightning that broke through the warped shutters. He had not meant to stay long when he first took the job. The ad in the paper had promised solitude and steady pay. Enough, he thought, to settle his mother's debts and perhaps afford better care for Margaret before the cancer claimed her completely. Donovan had arrived 6 months ago with 2 battered suitcases and a heart hollowed out by desperation. He'd seen the old trunk in the corner of the sitting room, its iron clasps rusted shut, and heard the local councilman mumble something about records and old instructions. But there had been so much to do, repairs to the living quarters, maintenance on the corroded gears, and Donovan had pushed thoughts of dusty journals and sailor superstitions aside. The lighthouse itself had been an unsettling presence even on clear days. Its walls groaned in the heat, and its iron stairs shuddered underfoot. But Donovan, a practical man by necessity, had long since learned to ignore the quirks of old structures. Tonight, however, as the gale battered the coastline and waves smashed themselves against the rocks below, there was an edge to the place you could not explain away. At precisely 3 minutes past midnight, Donovan woke to a sound that should have not existed. Knock, knock, knock. Sat up, blinking into the darkness. For a moment he thought it had been a dream, some phantom noise stitched together by a restless mind. Then it came again, this time louder. Knock, 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 against the heavy oak door at the base of the tower. Donovan swung his legs out from under the quilt, wincing as the cold floorboards bit into his bare feet. Pulled on his boots without bothering to lace them and reached for the lantern perched on the bedside table. The flame inside shivered and leaned against every gust that pressed against the walls. The spiral staircase moaned under his weight as he descended, the lantern casting a swinging circle of light ahead of him. Shadows bled from the corners where the stonework met the wooden supports, and the air smelled faintly of salt and old smoke. Donovan tightened his grip on the lantern handle and muttered a curse under his breath. At the bottom of the stairs, he paused, listening. The storm roared around the lighthouse, but beneath it, he thought he heard something else, the faint, persisting tapping against the door. Not frantic, not desperate, merely insistent, as if whatever waited outside had infinite patience. He crossed the room, his boots thudding against the uneven floor, and laid his free hand on the iron latch. For a moment he hesitated, the old instincts of a dock worker stirring in his mind. Never open a door at night, especially not during a storm. But reason quickly overruled superstition. If it was a sailor in distress or some poor soul washed ashore, Donovan could not in good conscience leave them to die. He lifted the latch and pulled the door open against the howling wind. The beam from his lantern pierced the darkness, illuminating a scene of pure desolation. Rain slashed sideways across the threshold. The rocky path leading down to the beach was slick with runoff, and beyond it the sea seethed. No figure stood on the doorstep. No shadow moved along the path. Donovan stepped outside for a moment, raising the lantern higher. Its light revealed nothing but stones and crashing surf. No footprints marked the mud at his feet. No voice called out from the blackness. Frowning, he retreated inside and closed the door firmly, sliding the iron bolt back into place with a dull scrape. He stood there for a moment longer, listening to the wind scream against the stone and wood, before finally turning away. Perhaps it had been nothing. Perhaps the storm had loosened a shutter somewhere and thrown a piece of debris against the door. The old mind, burdened by worry and lack of sleep, often heard what it expected to hear. Still, as Donovan climbed back up the stairs to his small, cold bed, he could not shake the feeling that something unseen had been waiting just beyond the reach of the lantern's glow. Something knew he had opened the door. Something that had been invited in. Part 2. Sleep did not come easily after Donovan climbed back under the quilt. The storm battered the lighthouse with relentless fury, rattling the windows in their frames and sending occasional shudders through the stone walls. He lay with his eyes closed, the sound of the wind rising and falling in waves, but rest remained elusive. Every time he drifted toward unconsciousness, he thought he heard the faint memory of that knock, ghosting through the whine of the storm. He told himself it was nerves, nothing more. The wind could weave strange illusions when pressed by exhaustion and isolation. The lighthouse had always been an eerie place, perched on the edge of the world like a long-forgotten sentinel. He had known that when he accepted the posting. Still, when the second knock came, there was no mistaking it. Knock, knock, knock. It was no longer a request for shelter. It was a summons. This time the sound carried a weight that the first had not. It rang sharply through the tower's hollow spaces, like a bell. Donovan sat bolt upright and swung his legs to the floor again, pulling his boots on with shaking hands. The lantern sat cold and dark on the bedside table. In his hurry, he'd forgotten to refill it earlier. Cursing under his breath, he grabbed the matches and coaxed the flame back to life, shielding it carefully from the gusts leaking through the warped window panes. The staircase seemed longer on the second descent. The shadows felt thicker and more aggressive, creeping up the walls and coiling in the corners. Donovan kept his eyes fixed ahead, unwilling to glance over his shoulder, though every instinct in him screamed that something followed just beyond the reach of the light. At the base of the stairs, he hesitated. The door stood before him, the solid oak boards, slick with moisture, trembling slightly on their hinges as the storm beat against it. For several long moments, Donovan remained frozen, weighing his options. Ignoring the knock was tempting, locking the bolt and retreating upstairs until daylight. However, another sound reached him then, softer, but infinitely more troubling. A whimper. It was faint, nearly swallowed by the howl of the wind, but it came again, unmistakably, a high, thin cry of distress, like that of a wounded animal, or a child. Grinding his teeth against the surge of unease, Donovan drew back the latch and hauled the door open. At first, he saw nothing but the rain. It battered the threshold in thick sheets, turning the worn stone slick and treacherous. His lantern's flickering beam revealed no figure standing in the deluge. No shape moved beyond the search of the light. But when he lowered his gaze, he found it. A bundle lay on the doorstep, tightly wrapped in a sheet of oilskin and bound with what looked like fishing twine. It was no larger than a sack of flour, but it shifted slightly as he watched, shuddering in a way that spoke of something alive, or at least once alive, within. The smell struck him next, salt and rot, like the shoreline after a red tide. Donovan fought the urge to recoil. Every rational thought in his mind screamed for him to leave it where it lay, to close the door, bolt it shut, and let the sea reclaim whatever horror it had coughed up onto his doorstep. But the whimper came again, this time clearly emanating from the bundle itself. Cursing under his breath, Donovan stepped forward. He crouched low, careful not to let the lantern's flame be extinguished by the gusting rain, and reached for the parcel. The oilskin was soaked through and slimy under his fingers. The bundle squirmed weakly as he lifted it, issuing a sound somewhere between a sob and a gurgle. The weight surprised him. It was heavier than it looked, dense and oddly warm despite the chill. With the bundle cradled awkwardly in one arm and the lantern in the other, Donovan staggered back inside. He kicked the door shut behind him, threw the bolt, its solid click providing only a hollow comfort. Standing in the center of the sitting room, water pooling around his boots, Donovan looked down at the shivering mass in his arms. His gut twisted painfully, torn between dread and an almost paternal instinct to protect. He set the bundle gently on the scarred kitchen table. It writhed weakly against the bindings, emitting a pitiful keening sound that raised the hair on the back of his neck. For a long moment, Donovan simply stood there, watching it. The storm raged outside, pounding against the stone walls as if demanding entrance. Inside, the only sound was the soft, labored breathing of the thing wrapped in oilskin. He would unwrap it. He would find out what the sea had delivered to his door. But he would not be able to pretend he did not know, deep down, that nothing ever good came knocking in the heart of a storm. Part 3. The knife sat on a hook above the kitchen counter, its wooden handle worn smooth by years of use. Donovan retrieved it with steady hands, though his stomach churned with unease. The bundle on the table twitched faintly, as though responding to his movements. Its oilskin wrapping had begun to loosen at the edges, leaking brackish water across the wood. Donovan approached the table, lantern in hand. He set the light down carefully, angling it to cast the widest glow. Restless shadows pulled beyond the edges of the room. Outside, the storm battered the lighthouse with renewed fury, but inside, the only sounds were the drip of water onto the floorboards and a labored breathing from within the bundle. He pressed the tip of the knife to the oilskin, hesitating. It was still time to reconsider, to bundle the thing back into the storm and let the sea reclaim whatever it had offered. Yet some stubborn instinct drove him forward, a duty to know, to confront the unknown rather than flee from it. With a conscious motion, Donovan sliced through the bindings. The twine snapped under the blade, and the oilskin parted with a wet sigh. He peeled it back layer by layer, revealing the thing hidden within. At first, he thought it was a child. The shape was right, small limbs curled in on themselves, a head too large for the spindly body. But as he leaned closer, the details grew wrong. The skin was translucent, stretched thin over delicate bones and networks of faintly pulsing veins. Dark, lidless eyes stared up at him, glassy and unblinking, reflecting the lantern light in wide, endless pools. Gills flared and fluttered along the sides of its neck, gasping for breath in the salty air. The creature shuddered weakly, emitting a sound halfway between a sigh and a sob. Donovan recoiled a step before catching himself. His first instinct, raw and primal, screamed at him to destroy the thing, to expel it from his home before it brought ruin down upon him. He tightened his grip on the knife, the handle slick against his palm. Yet the creature made no move to harm him. It lay helpless on the table, shivering, its thin chest rising and falling with shallow, ragged breaths. It was suffering. Whatever it was alive, and it was suffering. An image rose unbidden in Donovan's mind. Margaret, frail and sunken into the narrow hospital bed, her hand trembling in his when she had last spoken. "Do not turn away from those who need you," she had whispered, "even when you're afraid." Donovan cursed softly under his breath and set the knife down. He could not kill it. Whatever instincts cried out against the thing's presence, whatever dark memories stirred at the edges of his mind, he could not stand by and let it die. He retrieved a woolen blanket from the cupboard and wrapped the creature carefully. Its skin felt clammy and oddly slick beneath his fingers, like something half-formed, but it did not resist. It only whimpered once, a pitiful, broken sound that made his throat tighten. He placed the wrapped creature near the iron stove, adjusting the vents to coax out more heat. The flames inside guttered, but then flared brighter, casting warm light across the room. The creature curled tighter into the blanket, visibly relaxing under the rising warmth. Donovan watched it for a long moment, tension slowly bleeding from his shoulders. As he stood there, the edge of his gaze caught something carved into the floorboards near the base of the stove. He knelt, brushing aside dust and grime with the edge of his sleeve, revealing a series of faint symbols, spirals interlocked with jagged lines, forming a sigil he did not recognize. The marks had been worn almost smooth by years of footsteps, but they remained faintly visible, an old, forgotten protection, perhaps. He straightened slowly, unease blooming anew in his chest. The journals, the trunk he had ignored. Donovan glanced toward the sitting room, where the battered trunk lay slumped against the wall. Its iron clasp still rusted shut. He had dismissed it when he arrived, too focused on survival to bother with superstition and sailors' tales. Now, in the flickering light of the stove, he wondered what warnings he might have missed. The creature stirred again, drawing his attention back to the present. Its black eyes fixed on him, impossibly deep, holding a flicker of something that felt too knowing to belong to a beast. Donovan found himself unable to look away, trapped in that unblinking gaze. He tore his eyes free and stepped back, shaking his head. His mind was playing tricks on him. It had to be. Exhaustion, stress, and isolation were powerful forces. He would tend to the creature tonight and keep it alive if he could. In the morning, he'd hike to town and send a message to the mainland. Let someone wiser and better equipped deal with whatever the storm had delivered to his doorstep. For now, the lighthouse stood firm against the raging dark, its beams slicing across the seething sea. And Donovan Kimball stood watch, unaware that the door he had opened would never again be closed. Part 4. The storm did not lessen as the night dragged on. If anything, it deepened, pressing against the lighthouse walls with a force that seemed almost personal. Rain battered the windows in frantic bursts, and the tower groaned under the constant assault of the wind. Donovan sat in the kitchen with the bundle still nestled near the stove, but his gaze kept drifting toward the battered trunk resting against the far wall. He had spent the past hour tending to the creature, drying its clammy skin with a threadbare towel and coaxing weak sips of water past its thin lips. Each act of kindness unsettled him further, gnawing at the foundation of his instincts. The creature's black eyes never closed, never blinked. They followed his every movement with a quiet, unsettling intensity. At last, when he could bear the weight of that stare no longer, Donovan rose and crossed the room to the trunk. The iron clasps had rusted shut, but a few sharp blows from the handle of the knife were enough to jar them loose. The lid creaked open, releasing a puff of musty, thick air with a scent of salt, mildew, and old paper. Donovan coughed and waved the cloud aside, squinting into the gloom. Inside, a tangle of leather-bound journals, brittle maps, and small, unfamiliar relics lay scattered. Atop the pile rested a ledger, its cover cracked and curling at the edges. Donovan lifted it free, brushing off a film of dust. The first page bore the names of the lighthouse's previous keepers, each one followed by dates, sometimes spanning decades, sometimes only a few months. Beside some entries, crude notes had been scrawled: lost to the sea, taken in the storm, new service completed. Donovan flipped through the ledger, the pages showing and growing more chaotic as he progressed. Early entries detailed maintenance schedules and supply orders. Later ones darkened, filled with terse, hurried handwriting that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting dread. One entry, penned in a spidery hand nearly illegible with haste, caught his eye. The barrier weakens. Each generation swears the oath anew, lest the children find a way ashore. Keep the light burning. Perform the offerings. Renew the wards. Without vigilance, the sea will claim what we stole. The sea never forgot, and neither did what slept beneath it. Donovan's mouth went dry. He set the ledger aside and pulled another volume from the trunk, this one smaller and bound in stained, water-warped leather. Inside, sketches depicted symbols eerily similar to those carved into the floor near the stove. Spirals and jagged lines intertwined with crude depictions of figures kneeling before the sea, offering strange bundles wrapped in cloth. Beneath one illustration, a single word had been etched in forceful strokes: act. Donovan dropped the journal onto the floorboards, recoiling as if burned. The lighthouse had never been simply a beacon for sailors. It had been a bulwark, a seal against something older and darker than the sea itself. Every keeper before him had known and had agreed to participate in the maintenance of that barrier. Sacrifices had been made, rituals performed, secrets kept. No one had told Donovan when he signed the employment contract. No mention had been made of blood debts or ancient promises. He'd inherited the responsibility unknowingly, through desperation and ignorance. He turned back toward the kitchen, and Granger remained by the stove, bundled tightly, breathing in shallow gasps. The firelight danced across its translucent skin, illuminating faint tracings of veins that throbbed with each fragile heartbeat. It looked vulnerable, almost pitiful, yet Donovan could no longer ignore the truth. By opening the door and taking the bundle inside, he had broken whatever fragile protection remained. Donovan rubbed a hand across his face, feeling the weight of exhaustion and fear settle deeper into his bones. His thoughts churned, each revelation dragging him further from the solid ground of reason and into a churning sea of uncertainty. A low, hollow sound drew his attention. At first he thought it was the storm again, another howl of wind surging against the tower. But as he listened, he realized it came from beneath the floor, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the stones. He knelt quickly, pressing his ear against the cold boards. The hum resolved itself into voices, distant and murmuring, as though an unseen congregation gathered beneath the lighthouse foundation. He could not make out the words, but the cadence chilled him. It was a chant, ancient and slow, rising and falling, with a rhythm that felt both alien and sickeningly familiar. Donovan scrambled to his feet. The lantern flickered violently on the table. Shadows twisted across the walls, warping into grotesque shapes that vanished when he looked at them directly. The storm outside no longer seemed natural. It was something else now, a living, seething entity pressing in against the thin walls of the lighthouse, demanding access. Donovan staggered back toward the trunk, frantically searching through the pile. His hands closed around a stone, black, smooth, and faintly warm to the touch. Strange sigils had been etched into its surface, though the language was unfamiliar. The relics of those who had fought this battle before him lay at his feet, abandoned by men who had either fled or failed. He glanced back at the creature still curled near the stove and felt a surge of helpless rage. This had never been a job. It had been a sentence. And by taking the keys and lighting the lamp 6 months ago, Donovan Kimball had unknowingly chained himself to a war that no man could win. Part 5. The first crack appeared in the lantern's glass. Donovan watched in helpless horror as the flame inside guttered and died, leaving the kitchen steeped in a suffocating gloom. The shadows, once restrained to the corners of the room, swelled outward, coating the walls and ceiling in darkness, their every movement synchronized with the distant chanting beneath the floor. He stumbled back and braced himself against the table. His hands, slick with sweat, slipped across the wood before he found his footing. He reached for the second lantern, kept on the shelf by the stairs, fumbling with the matches. It took several tries before the flame caught, sputtering weakly to life. The new light revealed that the creature had shifted. It no longer laid huddled in its blanket, but had risen onto thin, trembling limbs. Its black, glassy eyes locked onto Donovan with a gaze that froze him where he stood. No helpless whimper passed its lips now. Instead, it tilted its head at an unnatural angle, regarding him with a patience that felt ancient and calculating. A new sound filtered through the battered walls, a low, dragging scrape along the outer stones of the lighthouse. Donovan turned toward the nearest window and peered into the storm. Figures pressed against the glass. At first, he could not distinguish them from the rain and mist, but as lightning split the sky, their forms sharpened into terrible clarity. Dozens of figures swayed outside the tower, clad in the tattered remains of sailors' garb. Faces bloated and warped by the sea peered inward with the hollow, accusing eyes. Barnacles clung to their rotted flesh, and seaweed streamed from their mouths like grotesque tongues. The watchers had arrived. The light atop the tower, the very heart of the lighthouse, flickered visibly through the storm, its steady pulse faltering like a dying heartbeat. Donovan knew instinctively that once the beam failed, there would be nothing left to hold the darkness at bay. The walls would crumble, the foundation would fail. The storm would not merely destroy the lighthouse, but would sweep beyond it, carrying its terrible cargo inland. He faced the creature again, his mind racing. Somewhere, deep inside, the truth solidified. The creature was no innocent victim. It was the key, the wedge that had been placed within the lighthouse to crack its defenses. By allowing its entry, Donovan had sealed the tower's fate. Yet perhaps, if he acted swiftly enough, he could undo the damage. Perhaps the sea would take back its child, and the breach could be repaired before the final collapse. He grabbed the blanket, scooping the creature up in one motion. It did not resist. It merely watched him with unblinking eyes, as if it had known all along what must come. Its skin, cold and clammy against his arms, sent a deep shiver through him. Donovan kicked open the door with his boot, bracing himself against the howling wind that tore at his coat and lashed his face with icy needles of rain. He staggered out onto the slick path, clutching the bundled creature tightly against his chest. The watchers turned as one. Their eyeless faces lifted toward him, and a chorus of low, mournful cries rose above the storm's roar. Some began to move, their rotted limbs dragging across the ground as they lurched toward him with dreadful purpose. Donovan forced his legs to move, slipping and stumbling along the broken stones that led to the cliff's edge. The path, already treacherous in calm weather, had become a death trap in the storm. He fell once, his knee striking the sharp edge of a rock, but he ignored the burst of pain and staggered back to his feet. The cliff loomed ahead, its jagged edge obscured by the curtain of rain. Beyond it, the sea boiled and heaved, frothing with unnatural violence. Waves the size of houses battered the rocks below, sending spray high into the air. Donovan reached the precipice and held the creature out over the abyss. For a moment he hesitated. The creature stared up at him, its expression serene. A flash of memory seared across his mind. Margaret's frail hand in his, her whispered plea, never to abandon those in need. He tightened his grip on the blanket, steeling his heart against the surge of doubt. With a hoarse cry, he hurled the bundle into the churning sea. The creature vanished into the darkness below without a sound. For a breathless moment, the world stood still. The light atop the tower flared suddenly, burning with a fierce, desperate brilliance. The watchers recoiled, shrieking, their forms dissolving into mist that the wind carried out over the water. The chanting beneath the lighthouse ceased, cut off as though a blade had severed it. Donovan staggered back from the cliff, chest heaving, blood pounding in his ears. He had done it. He had acted. He had chosen. But in the hollow between heartbeats, Donovan felt no true relief, only a terrible, echoing silence from the deep. Part 6. Donovan stumbled backward from the cliff's edge, his breath tearing in and out of his lungs with desperate force. The wind, still vicious, seemed somehow less charged now, stripped of its malevolent intelligence that had pressed against the lighthouse walls. Overhead, the clouds churned and cracked apart, revealing thin slashes of pale, reluctant stars. The beam of the lighthouse burned with renewed strength, slicing cleanly through the night in long, unwavering sweeps. The great lens atop the tower spun in its housing, casting its protective gaze far out over the dark, heaving waters. Donovan recoiled at the sight. Against all odds, the light still stood. He had preserved it. He turned his gaze back to the sea. The watchers had receded, their bloated, tattered forms dissolved into the mist, leaving behind only shredded remnants of clothing and a few swirling eddies of foam along the rocks. The voices that had murmured beneath the lighthouse, the ancient chant that had gnawed at his sanity, had fallen silent. For the first time that night, the oppressive weight that had hung over the world seemed to lift, and Donovan allowed himself to believe that he had averted disaster. The cold rain continued to fall, but without the same ferocity. It patterned against the stones with a natural cadence rather than the earlier frenzy. The wind, though still sharp, no longer howled with that strange human edge. The world, battered and broken, had endured. Donovan pressed a hand against his aching ribs, feeling the deep bruises from his fall along the path. Pain radiated through his side and down his leg, but he welcomed it. Pain meant survival. Pain meant that he still had a body to feel anything at all. With stiff movements, he began the slow, laborious climb back toward the lighthouse. The path was treacherous underfoot, slick with mud and rain, but Donovan no longer cared. Each step, though grueling, brought him closer to the battered tower, to shelter, to safety, to the familiar warmth of the stove and the comforting solidity of stone walls between himself and the raging world beyond. He reached the lighthouse door and braced himself against the frame, drawing in slow breaths in an attempt to steady his shaking hands. His heart raced, but a deeper, quieter part of him had begun to hope. Margaret's voice echoed faintly in his memory, full of pride and relief. "You did what you had to do. You stood your ground." Donovan smiled grimly and pushed open the door. Inside, the kitchen remained much as he had left it. The second lantern still flickered atop the table, casting long, slow-moving shadows across the worn floorboards. The stove crackled softly, emitting waves of heat that chased away the damp chill. For a few blessed moments, it was easy to believe that the nightmare had passed, that normalcy, whatever remained of it, might be restored. Yet something gnawed at the edges of his awareness. Donovan paused on the threshold, frowning. The air inside the lighthouse felt heavier than it should have, despite the retreat of the storm. A faint, unpleasant odor clung to the walls, not the sharp tang of sea salt or smoke, but something deeper, more primal. It reminded him of earth turned over in a graveyard after a torrential rain, of rot awakened by disruption. He closed the door carefully behind him and dropped the iron bolt into place. The lighthouse creaked and settled around him, the ancient stones flexing under the weight of the wind. Donovan crossed to the trunk once more, intending to retrieve another warding relic to reinforce whatever fragile defenses he could muster before morning. As he knelt, searching through the jumbled contents, another flicker of unease gripped him. The ground beneath his boots vibrated almost imperceptibly, a low, pulsing tremor that grew stronger with each passing second. Donovan rose slowly and crossed to the nearest window, peering out into the darkness beyond. Far below, along the rocky shore where the creature had fallen, the sea no longer churned aimlessly. A great shadow moved beneath the surface, larger than any ship. The ocean, vast and uncaring, bore something toward the land. A new storm gathered on the horizon, blacker and more sinister than the last. Donovan swallowed hard, dread hollowing out his chest. The battle he had fought was not the war. It had only been the beginning. Part 7. Donovan stood frozen at the window, unable to tear his gaze from the black shape that churned beneath the surface of the sea. It was vast and ancient, beyond comprehension, and it moved with a terrible grace, the way a continent might shift unseen in the depths, dragging the tides in its wake. Even from this distance, he could feel it. The newly gathered storm roiled above it, tendrils of cloud reaching down like groping fingers. Lightning flickered within the churning mass, illuminating glimpses of impossible shapes that writhed and twisted, things with too many limbs and eyes that swallowed the light. The ocean, once wild and reckless, now moved with the order of something summoned, obedient to a will older than the land itself. Donovan backed away from the window, legs trembling beneath him. The journals had warned him, he realized too late. They had whispered in brittle, fading ink. Once a child of the storm crosses your threshold, the old bonds are broken. By taking the bundle inside, he had not merely endangered the lighthouse, he had cracked the foundation that held the ancient pact in place. His desperate act of mercy, however noble, had been exactly what the sea had waited for. The creature had not been a survivor or a refugee. It had been the key. The lighthouse beam, though still spinning, no longer pierced the darkness as it once had. Its light struck the storm and dissolved into it, swallowed without reflection or resistance. The beacon, like a voice shouting into a void too deep to answer, grew fainter with every sweep. Far beyond the cliff's edge, along the ruined shoreline, Donovan could see new shapes rising from the surf. Forms that moved upright but slithered and twisted in ways no human body could endure. Limbs ended in finned stumps, faces stretched into slack amphibian sneers. They poured out from the sea in numbers too great to count. The watchers had only been the first. A low vibration rattled the stones underfoot, spreading outward in widening circles. It carried with it a sound, deep and resonant, that vibrated in Donovan's teeth and bones. It was not a voice, yet it spoke all the same, a language made of gravity and inevitability, too old for human minds to name. He stumbled toward the kitchen table, clutching at it for sport. The The second lantern still burned there, its tiny flame struggling against the gloom. It sputtered as if the very air sought to smother the light, and flared weakly before finally steadying. Donovan sagged into the chair nearest the stove, his arms hanging limp at its side. He knew now that no message would reach the mainland in time. No ship would brave the waves boiling beyond the cliffs. No townsperson would wake before the sky fell. His thoughts splintered into fragments. Margaret's frail smile in her hospital bed, the warmth of the woolen blanket wrapped around the creature, the steady ticking of the lighthouse gears in better days. All of it would be swept away. The towns and cities inland, still sleeping under calm, starless skies, would never know the reason why their world ended in silence and flood. Outside, the sea rose higher, and in the deep places the first true children stirred. The storm began to sing, a deep, endless note that wound itself around the bones of the world. Donovan closed his eyes and bowed his head. The children of the storm had come home at last, and behind them, something older, something hungrier, reached for the world that had forgotten its name. That was Children of the Storm by Vivian Granger, performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry.
You ever feel like the ocean remembers you, Otis? Because that one didn't just knock, it delivered.
Well, let this be your reminder. The sea gives, the sea takes. And sometimes it sends you something it wants you to keep.
If you enjoyed tonight's journey through haunted hallways, cursed homes, and whispering walls, you're in luck. There's more waiting for you in the patrons area. Extended ad-free episodes featuring bonus tales and exclusive horrors you won't hear anywhere else.
It's just $7.99 a month, or save big with a yearly plan, and it gives you full access to every story, every scream, without a single commercial break. You'll be sporting indie horror and making sure the doors to the dark stay open.
To join, just head to simplyscarypodcast.com and click the Patrons tab, or go straight to chillingtalesfordarknights.com to become a member. Come closer to the stories, if you dare.
From all of us here at Chilling Entertainment, thank you for your support.
If tonight's episode proved anything, it's that some places aren't just creepy, they're hungry. A hallway filled with watchers, a house that remembers your footsteps, a lighthouse that opens its door to the sea, a tunnel that leads somewhere older than time, and a doll that never stopped loving you back.
Tonight was a reminder that some thresholds are meant to remain untouched, and some memories stay buried for a reason. But horror doesn't wait for permission. It seeps in through every crack, between walls, beneath floors, and through screens we leave glowing at night.
If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our parent channel, Chilling Tales for Dark Nights on YouTube, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new nightmare.
And if your craving for darkness goes even deeper, swing by my other show, Otis Jiry's Tales from Duskwood, where an entire season's worth of eerie encounters await you. You'll find it on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere else you haunt your ears.
We also want to hear from you. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and tell us which story stuck with you tonight, or which one you were too afraid to finish alone.
And let's not forget to thank the extraordinary authors who led us into tonight's forbidden places. Without their imaginations, we'd still be safe.
But safe is boring. So the next time someone dares you to open a sealed door, venture into a familiar house, or stare too long into the reeds,
remember, some places weren't just forgotten, they were sealed shut. For good reason.
Sleep well, listeners.
If you can. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark, a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com today to learn more about our network and our other amazing storytelling programs. Tonight's program was hosted, and its featured stories performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. Selected stories have been adapted with the kind permission of their respective authors. Original music provided by Luke Hodgkinson and Jesse Cornett. Sound design and final mixing and mastering provided by executive producer and director Craig Groshek. Program's artwork and logo by David Romero. If you're looking for some fresh tales on a daily basis while waiting for the next podcast, check out my YouTube channel, the Otis Jiry channel, and my extensive collection of narrated tales there. Simply search on YouTube by my name and you'll find me. And don't forget to subscribe and press the bell notification icon to get my latest releases. Got a scary tale of your own that you'd like performed? I take submissions. Email it to me today at otis@simplyscarypodcast.com to have your terrifying tome considered for production in a future episode of this show. That's otis@simplyscarypodcast.com. If you've enjoyed what you heard on tonight's program and are joining us on your favorite podcast app, subscribe to us to be sure you never miss an episode, and leave a 5-star review and a comment. Your feedback means a lot to me. You can also follow Chilling Tales for Dark Nights and yours truly on Facebook to connect anytime and get the latest updates on this and other programs and my channel. If you're listening on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel, do us a favor and hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon for ctfdn as well to get more spooky tales from me and the crew and another episode of this program each and every Wednesday. And don't forget to hit that thumbs up button to tell us how we're doing and leave a kind word or a request. And don't forget to visit us at chillingtalesfordarknights.com and consider supporting the team by becoming a patron. In addition to helping us out, you'll get exclusive access to our audio archive and ad-free downloads of all your favorite stories, including those you've heard on this program. As for me, I'll be back next Wednesday with more terrifying tales to keep you up all night. But that's all right. Who needs sleep anyway?
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.